Welcome to Novara Live. I'm Helena, aka NoJusticeMTG, your host for this evening. Coming up on tonight's show, voters go to the polls in Makerfield for a by-election that could lead to Andy Burnham becoming Prime Minister. Donald Trump has signed a peace deal with Iran, but will it hold? And of course, predictably, the pro-Israel crowd is furious about said peace deal. Now, we're going to finish tonight's show at 7. But make sure you do not go anywhere and get your kettles on, because we'll be back at 9:45 p.m. this evening for a special late night stream, bringing you the latest results and expert analysis on the Makerfield by-election. Stephen, what can we look forward to?
Hey, Helena. Well, I'm hoping that you can look forward to quite a lot, actually. We have a big roster of guests who we're going to be interviewing from the studio. But also, for the first time, we have Aaron Bastani and a crew at the Count in Makerfield, hopefully catching interviews there, bringing us updates from the auditorium, if it all works, and inshallah it will. So that's something for you to look forward to later, we hope. I think it's going to be a big one, though. It's going to be a big one. We're going to go till late, and we will, see how things unfold and plan to be on air when the results come out as well.
Perfect. Absolutely. Absolutely. And now, before we get started, I do see, Stephen, you're wearing, in celebration of England's 4-2 victory over Croatia, your Team Novara Media football shirt. I give show the audience what you're wearing.
Well, I'll give you a little twirl.
Little twirl.
This is the away kit. Very stylish, very comfortable, beautiful colours. We've got a home kit as well. I mean, they've all run out. They were so popular. They sold out really quickly.
Due to the first batch selling out in 24 hours, we're doing a pre-order to make sure we don't need to make any more than necessary. Pre-orders will close at 1 minute to midnight on Monday, the 29th of June. The shirts are £40 and will take 4 to 6 days to be shipped to you. And they're made from 100% recycled polyester by anti-fascists in Italy. Head to shop.novaramedia.com to get yours. The day is upon us, from Labour's disasters in Runcorn and in Gorton Denton, and after last month's catastrophic local election results, is the life raft finally going to arrive in time to save the Labour Party? Polls are set to close in the Makerfield by-election at 10 p.m. tonight, with not just the fate of the beleaguered Prime Minister Keir Starmer at stake, but potentially that of the whole country. Not that Labour's candidate and expected PM-in-waiting Andy Burnham would let the pressure get to him, though. He's posted this cheery video on Twitter earlier today.
Well, I feel a bit sad doing this. It's my last campaign update. Got my Sunday best on because it's polling day. And it's all a bit, looks quiet, doesn't it, here at our Stubshire Cross Nerve Centre? It's because everybody's out. And I'm sorry to say this, they're knocking on your door again. But for the last time. It's polling day, everyone, as you know. It's just a great thing that the power is now where it should be. It's in your hands. It's in the hands of the people of this area. And it's up to you what you decide today. But hopefully, of course, I would say, let's vote for positive change that this country needs. Let's forever associate this area, this constituency, with having brought a change to British politics that it's long needed. That's what I feel so hopeful about today. I've really enjoyed all of our conversations. Thanks so much. You've given me plenty to think about. If I do succeed, I will stay completely rooted in this place, and everything will come from it. So thanks again. Enjoy the day. Enjoy the campaign. Hopefully you can stay up for the result, and let's make the change begin here in Makerfield.
Now, this broadly has been his pitch to the constituency from the get-go, and end the domination of politics from Westminster and putting the interests of the North back at the heart of Labour politics, having been abandoned for decades, then betrayed by Boris Johnson over migration and botched promises of levelling up, only to be betrayed once again by Keir Starmer's empty platitudes of change that never materialised. Betrayal might actually be too diplomatic a word to describe what Makerfield voters think of Keir Starmer, as many canvassers found out when they were speaking to voters.
In Makerfield, if you knock on someone's door, and maybe even if they've got an Andy Burnham sign outside that door, anywhere in the constituency, and you mention Keir Starmer's name, the response is genuinely visceral, and people really don't like him. I was telling you earlier, I met somebody who disliked Starmer so much that they wouldn't say his name. He was kind of like Lord Voldemort. And it was just that man. That man has ruined this country. That man did this. That man did this. And it does make you think, you know, regardless of how you want to look at Starmer's time as Prime Minister, it's very hard to imagine someone who's that unpopular fighting another general election. It really is.
It is remarkable how much of Labour's poor polling can be traced back to Keir Starmer specifically. In this constituency at the local elections, Labour lost every seat they were defending, but by healthy margins as well. And with Burnham currently the odds-on favourite and leading in every constituency poll thus far, it does demonstrate the absolute kind of chasm in political approval that separates Burnham from the Prime Minister. Now, it's not that Starmer doesn't have his own ever-shrinking pool of loyalists, though, and they seem unable to fathom his unpopularity.
You look at the abuse that he puts up with, the effort. I've always been baffled by the personal approval ratings, because my major criticism of Keir Starmer is that he's been a little bit too woolly. He's been a little bit too vanilla, if you like. He hasn't bashed enough heads together. He hasn't cracked enough eggs. He hasn't set off enough alarms. And yet his personal approval ratings are absolutely dire. I guess what I'm saying is I can't tell where the madness stops anymore and the story starts. How much of the disaffection with Keir Starmer has been carefully cultivated? And listen, I even wonder whether or not the Labour Party itself is disaffected with Keir Starmer due to a process of political osmosis. Whether or not they're looking at all the coverage and they're looking at all the social media activity and they are arriving at a conclusion. I really hope this isn't the case, because if it is, I think I'm guilty of it too. And they're arriving at the conclusion that Keir Starmer is a liability and he's got to go, which is, of course, the conclusion that has driven Andy Burnham's decision to surrender the mayoralty of Manchester and try to become an MP again.
It's always the thing that we hear constantly is people who, especially who are kind of Starmer loyalists, especially from the media kind of sphere, always kind of going, I don't get why he's so unpopular. Why are the approval ratings so low? How can he be worse than Liz Truss? He's so sensible. And I'm like, sure, I think most people probably would rate him above Liz Truss in terms of his role as a Prime Minister. The issue, of course, is that even people like Truss and people like Corbyn and Thatcher, people who have kind of divisive political outlooks, I mean, obviously Truss is definitely the least popular of all of these people, they at least had a base somewhere. There were free marketeers throughout the kind of conservative part of our political spectrum who backed Liz Truss. I mean, the broad neoliberal consensus is what Thatcher created. And so she has many people who are hangers-on from that, who gained out of right to buy. And Jeremy Corbyn is an out-and-out socialist who many people, part of the Labour coalition, have backed for a very, very long time. Now, they think that a lot of the people who hate Keir Starmer now are doing so specifically because of negative polarisation, because of a media campaign. But these people were always going to be right-wingers who were always going to have media dedicated towards them. They hated on whoever the Labour Party leader was at the time. It's just, of course, that kind of press coverage was taken as being sincere when these people who currently like Keir Starmer were believing that stuff when it was said about Jeremy Corbyn. The difference with Keir Starmer, of course, specifically, is that he has no base. The actual people, the Labour Party faithful, he said the door is open and you can leave. He actively courted people outside of the voter coalition at the expense of the ones within it, which is why he is uniquely unpopular, because there's just nobody left. There's nobody left outside, again, of like a very small minority of swing kind of upper middle class voters who his technocracy, I mean, pretty failed technocracy if you ask me, that appeals to. Especially at a time in which we're seeing living standards not continually increase as much as people want them to, and people are honestly looking for actual change and radical alternatives. And so, again, if you are somebody who's served specifically by Keir Starmer's kind of managerial politics, it is going to be difficult for you to understand how hated he is. James is rather correct, though, about the conclusions of the Labour Party membership. Over half of Labour members believe Keir Starmer cannot turn the party's fortune around, and polling by Compass suggests that over a third of members are considering resigning their membership too. If there's one person that does disagree with that assessment, though, it's the PM himself. He's pledged to fight any potential leadership election should Burnham or another challenger arise. This doesn't seem to have impressed Kate McCann at the Times, however.
I suspect at the moment Keir Starmer thinks he's being courageous and dutiful. I think he thinks at the moment he's driven by a sense of duty, in that he has a mandate, there was an election, and that I am the man who has been chosen by the rest of the country, not just a bit of my party, not just these people in Makerfield, but the rest of the country to govern, and therefore that's my duty to do that. But there is quite a fine line between the idea of duty and that flipping into arrogance.
Yeah,
and I think the moment it flips into arrogance, I think we're on the cusp of that actually already. I think there is a growing feeling within the party and within the country that there is a bit of arrogance there. I think when you hit arrogance, that is no longer tenable, and you cannot continue in that role if people think that you are being arrogant, and that will be enough to rile up the party underneath Keir Starmer to really make a shift.
And that's the thing, is that I think he is kind of arrogant because basically he'd been told by the media up until he became Prime Minister that he was basically the Prime Minister-elect already before any single vote had been cast. They barely scrutinised any of the things that he was saying in the run-up to the election because he was presumed to be the heir apparent to Rishi Sunak. Given the state of the polling, they were trying to make sure they had access because they knew he'd be powerful, so they wanted to make sure they didn't piss him off. And on top of this, he got this giant majority of incredibly small percentage of the vote, and indeed fewer votes than Jeremy Corbyn got in 2 general elections. So he wasn't just in the position of being Prime Minister through anything other than kind of favourable electoral mathematics rather than genuine popularity. And the talk of a mandate is nonsensical, as the mandate of the Prime Minister is given to them by the elected Parliament. People don't vote for a Prime Minister, they vote for elected politicians. And so, yeah, it's perfectly reasonable if they think that the current Prime Minister is not doing a good job, that they can lose confidence, they can be ejected and replaced by somebody else, whether they've joined the Parliament just recently or not. And again, it is the height of arrogance to believe that Morgan McSweeney's electoral super genius in terms of winning the election in 2024 means that you have a 5-year mandate, even if the public hates you. Stephen, do you think that this is going to be as pivotal as all of the hype is coming up to be, or do you think that we're going to see a real kind of tight leadership contest in the future?
No, I think I think there's very little chance of a tight leadership contest. I think the political will is not there in the country for to endure such a thing. I think Starmer probably is very well aware of that. I mean, I think he has, maybe his personal approval has in some ways improved over recent weeks, or at least his sort of, energy on screen. And that's partly because, he no longer has, and he knows it, he no longer has the responsibility. I mean, I think that idea of duty, this feeling of only he can do it, or he's been elected by the people to do it, and only he can. I think that, that's something he definitely probably felt before, but of course, the people are talking now. I know they're only talking in Makerfield, but the polls say a lot as well, right? That tells you a lot about what the country thinks of Keir Starmer. So yeah, I think this is going to be absolutely crucial, and I think it's really clear from briefing that we've had already that Andy Burnham is already kind of acting in a way which is quite prime ministerial, like he's telling people in the cabinet not to jump ship, not to speak out, because he wants to preserve some kind of economic stability as this transition takes place. There's a lot of talk of setting out a transitional period. I mean, I think it's pretty much a done deal, to be honest. And I think it is. I don't feel sorry for Keir Starmer at all. I think he's a terrible politician. I think he either was completely on board with being manipulated by the Labour Together lot, or he was himself one of the plotters. But the one good thing that he's done is that he's served his country well in being the fall guy for whatever comes next, right? So he's been the one who has, not been able to deal with like the Tory mess left behind. That can be part of a blank slate, a new Labour, which actually does now look to tidy up the mess that they left, a complete erosion of the state, try and do a little bit of state rebuilding in the wake of the Tories, which I think Starmer really hasn't tried to do. He's had lots of plans to do it at various points, but none of them really seem to have got any traction. But there will be positives of the Starmer years as well. There will be economic positives, and whoever the next leader is the person who's going to sweep them up. I mean, things are actually going slightly better for the country, slowly, but then it's not being felt by a lot of people yet. But those will eventually come through, and it'll be the next person who will get the credit for them. But I think it's really just the country needs a vibe shift. To be honest, it's this kind of, as you said, this managerial style, this kind of controlling style, stacking Parliament full of, briefcase MPs who are Starmer supporters who, I really can't bear, who totally detached from their constituencies, totally detached from the people who elected them because they were the Labour candidates, and those people trusted Labour to do better in the wake of the Tories.
I thought they were the highest quality candidates, Stephen. Mandelson approved.
Well, isn't that a badge of honour, right? Mandelson approved. Wouldn't you want that on your CV?
Well, I mean, it stands to reason why they're having to get somebody in from outside to potentially be the heir apparent here, right? Because they gutted all the actual talent away because they perceived it to be a threat to Keir Starmer. It is it's testament to the hubris of the Labour Together project that they thought it was so kind of watertight in terms of how successful it would be. The Tories were bad, we'll sweep to power, we're the good guys with a good team, we'll just do things better because we're better, rather than having to play the political game or whatever it is, right? Or in terms of actually having a base with which to build upon, which they obviously jettisoned deliberately for political reasons. They thought, we won't need anyone other than Starmer. We won't need a single other person. And now we have this total deliberate, manufactured dearth of talent across the Labour benches, and they're having to be saved by someone who had an existing job as Mayor of Greater Manchester.
And there's also like a complete lack of vision, right? Or the vision keeps shifting, or it goes in and out of focus. Like I constantly have this image of a sort of, you've got a lovely park in your neighbourhood. Let's call it the state. One night, a gang goes through, tips over the seesaws, breaks the slides, digs up the flowers, kicks up sods of lawn. We'll call them the Tories. You're in despair. Like this fantastic resource, which you should be able to rely on for your family and so forth, is in complete shambles. And a couple of prefects come along and they say, well, we'll sort it out. And they spend all their time trying to get contracts with like local businesses or trying to get branding deals to sort of improve the park in some way. And if you're in James O'Brien's position, by the way, you're not in that neighborhood. You're looking from somewhere else and you're seeing, oh yeah, this is a really great effort of like people I relate to because I was head boy too. But actually the people live there just saw nothing change except for sort of, a kind of shininess to it, to the suggestion of change. And like really what people are asking for now, I think, is actually someone to come along and say, muck in, let's all get on it, let's sort this place out, let's put the seesaw back up, get the slides working again, so on and so forth. And I think that's a simple vision, sort things out. It's not a complicated vision. It was complicated in the Starmer period, which I suspect is over, in the Starmer period, by the idea that it had to be groundbreaking or shiny or sort of really deeply entwined with like brilliant things like international finance and the arms trade. Actually, it can just be quite simple. And I think maybe that is what Andy Burnham is sort of promising. Well,
again, he talks about like this end to neoliberalism as part of being his plan. Like, rebuilding state capacity is such an important part of that, just to do the basic stuff right. And if you like state capacity, Mariam Naxi-Carter has some good work on that, and you come see her on Monday.
Yes.
But what do the residents of Makerfield think, though? Eagle-eyed viewers might recognise this butcher from one of our recent videos, who was spoken to as well by LBC this week.
What do you think of Andy Burnham?
He's been in, he's a smashing bloke, there's no airs and graces about him. He wants to make politics, I said it being Londonised all the time, he wants it to bring up north, which can only be better for us all. He has got some good policies, which I've read some of his policies. He's done loads for Manchester. He's been in since 2017. That's credibility for anybody. It's 10 years as Lord Mayor, so brilliant.
What do you think generally about reform?
Reform? The lad what's representing reform, he's a local lad, he's self-employed, he's going to be an hard-working lad, but he's not got the background or the political information, like Andy has.
The Reform candidate he's referring to is local plumber Rob Kenyon, who has not had the best of campaigns, in truth. From embarrassing interviews in which he doesn't know his own party's policies, to not knowing whose job it is to hire more police officers, to unearthed forum posts in which he proudly declared his own sexism, it seems like our butcher friend here is pretty on the money in terms of Kenyon's inexperience. Reform UK have slowly slid back in constituency polls the more voters have seen of him, markedly if you look at the number of women especially. Reform councillor and spokesperson Layla Cunningham didn't seem very fazed by this, though.
Does it weaken your party's position and indeed your message today when your party's candidate in the Makerfield by-election described himself as a sexist? What kind of message does that send? Do you put your head in your hands when you hear people say that in your party? Or say some of the things that some of the men say?
It was an unwise... All his comments that have been, scrutinised to the max. It was an unwise comment. I've met him. I spent a whole day with him. He's not a sexist at all. I think it was probably just banter. He's a lovely bloke.
Isn't that part of the same defence of, I'm not talking about him in particular, but the same defence of men who on a tube might say, and forgive my language, might say, oh, nice ass, or comment on your breasts just before they get off the train after walking past you. You might have had this. I've certainly had this over the years. Or touch you, or say negative things about you, say what they think are positive things about you, commenting on your body. That's all part of the soup that ends up in harassment of women?
I think an in-person comment like that when I'm on the tube is a lot more threatening than something he said online in a chat. I don't think you can compare it.
But it sets the tone, doesn't it? It sets a tone.
He said it years ago. Listen, I'm not here to he's a great guy. He may have said some unwise comments, and I'll leave it at that.
So you don't think he's a sexist?
Not.
Oh, it's just banter. Admonishing women for getting abortions now. That's just playful banter, apparently, according to Layla Cunningham, defender of women here. It's also interesting, at least she's saying banter and not locker room talk, as Yankofied Zia Yusuf would say. Now, such defences of his behaviour have been lost on the public, as Lewis Goodall found out when speaking to residents for the Newsagents podcast.
So we've just met you, just in your car. You were just going to the shop.
Yeah.
And I heard you over here in front of this reform bus with Rob Kenyon.
Mm-hmm.
You just said sexist.
Yeah.
Why'd you say that?
Well, I've seen loads of videos and stuff like of what he said about women and that he's sexist and he doesn't care.
They say they're not those things. They just say they're saying common sense.
There's proof that there is, though. The proof that they are. Like, there's literal proof that they are. Like, he literally said, I'm sexist. He said it himself, didn't he? So how can you really argue when he said it is himself?
What do you say to young women like that? Because people
picking out straws, aren't they? They're going. You go back on anybody, go back on you, and go back on me. 20 years. We've all said silly things at certain times. You do. It's human
I've never
nature.
endorsed anybody online who said that they're going to lick Carol Vorderman's
arsehole.
arsehole.
Say things. It's a normal working town.
Yeah, just normal working town stuff. Yeah, like if you go and speak to normal working people, they're all like Rob Kenyon, aren't they, Stephen?
I mean, they're obviously not.
Sarcasm, by the way.
Yeah, I do think though, like this idea, the woman who called out sexist there, there's such a kind of casual approach to the idea that women are regularly objectified, discussed to their faces, behind their backs. That still exists. That's not something that just happened 20 years ago, like those blokes were saying, oh, we all said dumb things 20 years ago. By the way, 20 years ago was 2006. Like, it's not like the 1970s.
Pete Russell Brand era.
It is Pete Russell Brand era. But actually like a really, really bad time, I think, those early 2000s for women. But the idea that, you just defend that now as, oh, well, it's just banter, online. Yeah, people say stupid things online. I've said stupid things online. We all have. But I don't think that, if you're a politician, you can just rely on that as the excuse, right? Because it doesn't show what you sort of expect from politicians, is that there would actually be like a sort of history of thinking about who you are and what you do out in the world. It's all right. I mean, look, everyone comes to politics at some point in their life, and maybe other things have gone on before. And I'm such a firm believer in the idea that we need more, not less, or fewer, less ordinary people in politics. But I think the thing with Kenyon is he just never sort of admitted that he was a sexist, right? Or that he
couldn't even apologise.
He couldn't even apologise. And I think the thing about saying stupid things online, which, as I say, everyone has done, including me, is that it's like super important to like recognize, yeah, you said a dumb thing, and the best thing to do is to apologize for it. And there might be a kind of firestorm for a moment, but it'll pass, and the apology will be on record. And you should be sincere about it, of course. And and I think people like the woman who called out sexist when he walked past. The reason they're doing that, some people will of course think, okay, the apology isn't good enough, but many people will be prepared to listen to that and think, okay, he does really regret it. So there'd be fewer women, I think, calling him a sexist if he actually said he was sorry and meant it.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. Just an acknowledgement that he's changed as a person, right? And I apologise for previous comments. I would be at least somewhat likely to go away. Probably less likely to be able to cover up the very recent comments involving Carol Vorderman, but probably the less said about those comments, the better.
They are not his comments, though. Like, I don't want to defend him. He's not the one who made the comment. He made a comment. We've all been thinking it or something like that in response to somebody else, and. Yeah, first of all, we haven't all been thinking it. But so it is like sort of sexist in its nature. It doesn't really understand like what the comment might mean for Carol Vorderman. But that's not his comment. I think that is like something that should be just as a matter of fact stated.
Fair enough. I was also not expecting so much of this by-election to be devoted to rimming discourse. So, there we go.
We should have more like this.
There's ever the surprise in the British political discourse in this country. Now, What Reform lose in the anti-sexism vote, however, is likely to be made up in the anti-immigration vote. According to Pollster More in Common, Makerfield is the 7th highest constituency in the country in terms of the levels of salience of migration as an issue, with 62% of residents having it as their primary concern. I don't think viewers at home will lead me to inform them of Reform's popularity with anti-immigration voters. The issue that Reform have in this by-election specifically comes from their right in the form of Rupert Lowe's Restore Britain. We covered on the show last week how Restore are really pounding the pavement at this by-election, trying to drag Reform further right by endorsing explicit ethno-nationalism. Some polls have shown the gap between Reform in second and Andy Burnham in first as being smaller than the number of people purportedly backing Restore Britain, meaning the party could be a genuine spoiler handing the seat to Andy Burnham. And it's not going unnoticed by the press either. Both the Telegraph and the Mail on Sunday have run high-profile stories alleging links between Restore Britain campaigners and neo-Nazi groups, including one such group that called for a whites-only Europe via ethnically cleansing Europe of all ethnic minorities and Jews. The Mail on Sunday article is quite something, a very unexpected outburst of liberalism from possibly the most right-wing paper in the country. Here's one excerpt. Among those campaigning for Restore in the constituency on Saturday was Callum Barker, a hardened neo-Nazi who was at the extremist Remigration Summit in Portugal 2 weeks ago. Remigration is a far-right concept referring to ethnic cleansing via the mass deportation of non-white minority populations. It was conceived as a response to the Great Replacement conspiracy theory, which asserts that global elites, often Jews, are systematically trying to replace white people with immigrants. What's that? My toothpaste is all outside of my tube. How do I get it back in? Well, that appears to be the Daily Mail approach to this, right? Like all of that anti-immigration rhetoric explicitly targeted at ethnic minorities coming out of like the broader right-wing press in this country. And now they're like, wait, this might have negative externalities in terms of the way people view the difference between different racial groups in this country. Heaven forfend, that might be the case. And we're seeing what's happening in terms of its effect on electoral politics. So obviously we covered the vote split there. It means that splitting of the vote means that it's more likely that other parties will come up through the middle because the left more broadly, or at least the people who oppose conservatism in this country, whether the Liberals or the left, are much better at naturally sorting themselves into voting coalitions and voting blocs and tactically voting for the most likely option. I mean, we're seeing it in this by-election. The Greens openly said that we're going to run a candidate. They've not really campaigned very hard, but people were already sorting themselves to tactically vote for Andy Burnham even before the election had started and the Greens had fielded a candidate. So that's already happening on the anti-conservative vote in this country, and the right more broadly haven't been as used to that self-sorting effect before, and we're going to see these spoiler effects happen much more often. So the Daily Mail and other outlets like it, if they want to have reform in government, are going to need to be able to find a way of getting people back from Restore to Reform. It also hurts Reform in a larger way in that by shifting the Overton window rightwards and making explicit like ethnic cleansing policy a red line in terms of what they do and don't want from a conservative party in this country or a far-right party in this country, it drags Reform away from the centre-ground voters that they are going to need to win over to be able to form a majority government. So there's double a problem in terms of how this affects Reform UK's ability to be able to win any kind of election. So it makes sense from a tactical perspective for the Daily Mail and the Telegraph and people like that to try and put the toothpaste back the tube in this way. Also, last point I will say is one of the biggest backers of Restore Britain is Elon Musk. And it shouldn't be surprising to see that people who talk about Jewish people in the way that they have done in those articles have explained could be backed by somebody who responded onto a tweet that said that Jewish people were pushing dialectical hatred against white people with "you have spoken the absolute truth," as Elon Musk did. Shouldn't be surprising. Now, if we return to Reform's Ayla Cullingham for just one more second, who is of Egyptian descent, she was on the Telegraph's podcast recently, and she made the startling revelation about how Restore Britain supporters have behaved towards her.
Listen, I've had racist abuse from Restore voters, and I know people are going to say, oh, I've had it from Reform voters, like you say, but I've had it the most since they've come into play. There's a
what
meme
kind of stuff?
Well, so there's a meme going around that every time, a lot of times I've seen, I could show it to you, it's basically me in a wheelbarrow, dead, being pushed by Rupert Lowe, saying, deport, Allahu Akbar, deport, and I'm dead. And that's going around. And my mum, what was scary is that somehow my mum saw it and she was bawling her eyes out. I get, every time I post something, I said, deport, you're not British. They have an issue with the kids of immigrant like myself, or immigrants who have become British. They have a problem. Somehow they don't I'm not saying Rupert does, but people from that party seem to think that I'm not British.
It does seem that it's not just people from Restore Britain to me who have that kind of language. Maybe it's not like Reform's kind of explicit policy, but I've heard similar things in terms of how people view ethnicity and how people view citizenship in this country from people who purport to support Reform as well. Do you think Leila Cunningham just is wearing the hot dog suit here, or do you think that she's just been totally oblivious to the fact of the undercurrent of the right-wing politics in this country?
I mean, I don't think she's oblivious to it because she's a part of it, right? So, I'm very sorry that she's suffered that abuse. I'm very sorry that she suffered it from Reform voters and from Restore voters. She shouldn't have. She shouldn't have to have. Nobody in this country should have to be the subject of that kind of racial hatred. But we can't. Rupert Lowe was in Reform, right, for a while, right?
Elected directly as a Reform MP.
Elected directly as a Reform MP. I don't think his ideas will have changed that much from the time he was elected. It was at a time in which Reform was really looking to consolidate its sort of power, its sort of influence in mainstream politics, and were very happy not only at the level of elected people. I mean, look, I obviously don't know what Rupert Lowe's actual ideas are. I only know what policies they've put out and what kinds of the kinds of things that people that support them like to say. So I'm not making any accusations about Rupert Lowe, but obviously there is a divergence in philosophy, and there probably was at the time between Reform and between Nigel Farage essentially and Rupert Lowe. But even at that point, when Rupert Lowe was sort of put in there or involved, Reform itself was very much buoyed by the kinds of people who have now joined, many of whom have now joined Restore, because as Reform has moved to a more central position, they don't feel represented anymore, and now suddenly it's Restore that represents them better, which is more able to articulate the kind of fine detail of the sort of racial hatred they would like to see. So there's a kind that Reform is offering, which sort of treats everybody who comes to this country as an asylum seeker as a potential criminal. It's talked about internment camps and mass deportations, and then there's a kind of broader kind that Rupert Lowe is pushing. But these are all on a spectrum of which Leila Cunningham is sort of paddling in some way, or not even paddling in, she's like swimming in it, but she's swimming in one part of it, which is the Reform part of it. So I don't think she can be surprised about these attitudes, because they exist amongst Reform voters, and many Reform voters are moving to Restore because they think Restore better represents those ideas. And Cunningham's job, as well as many as the other Reform MPs, will be to pull them back, and it's a very very difficult game to play, because of course Leila Cunningham really is someone who's going to appeal to disenchanted Tories.
Well, she is one. She was a Tory councillor up until very recently.
Exactly. So she's going to appeal to them. Nigel Farage, obviously, in his extremely foolish remarks over Southampton, has appealed to try to get that Restore lot back to Reform, or to sort of position himself as sort of the leadership and the vanguard of these kinds of this kind of two-tier policing anger, which turned violent. They are playing an extremely tricky game with not by no means the whole of the electorate who want to vote for Reform or who want to vote for Restore, but by an element within that flows between the two quite easily, and that is an element which is inspired by anger, which has turned into racist anger, racial anger, and yes, it's going to it's the reason that partly that Cunningham is perhaps getting that abuse is because they feel that she is not only of an Egyptian heritage, but also that she's part of the party that's betrayed it when at the beginning it was sort of kind of encouraging the views that they had.
Yeah, especially when there was a real schism that happened within the party, to which Rupert Lowe was removed. We can only speculate as to the reasons that this was, in terms of could it potentially look like a threat for the leadership internally? Could it be because he was too right-wing and he might have dragged the party too far right as far as Farage was concerned? We don't know.
But if he had made a leadership challenge, it would have been because he would have been buoyed up by that part of Reform's voting bloc at the time, if he'd won it.
So the schism was going to happen eventually.
It was going to have to happen, because you can't be a party like Reform, which is really looking for respectability,
Well, they need to, again, we're in first past the post. They need to build a big enough coalition to win outright the majority, right?
And Restore can take votes from them, can show them up in lots of constituencies, I imagine, but they're never going to get anywhere with it. It's always going to just be, they're going to just hold Reform back, drain the votes from them. And, to that I say thank God for them. But also what they're doing is that they're capturing something that we're not really addressing in this country, which is this kind of appetite for a quite aggressive, well, not quite, this sort of racial hatred which is sort of brewing and developing and circulating in parts of our electorate.
I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've seen plenty of agitprop in terms of trying to specifically define crimes as being parts of an ethnicity. That's come from broadly lots of people on the far right, regardless of party affiliation. And it has led to a position where people are just viewing ethnic minorities more broadly as being suspicious, if not broadly dangerous. And that's where I think a lot of the dangerous parts of the rhetoric have led us to.
You signed the deal? You signed the MOU? It's signed, yeah. You signed? You signed it in Versailles. Why did you sign it?
That was US President Donald Trump leaving France's Versailles after signing a formal memorandum of understanding with Iran, ending the current US assault on the country. For now. This was the moment Trump signed the deal at the end of the recent G7 summit.
This was not easy, I can tell you.
Trump is right. It wasn't easy. It required the deaths of between 3,500 and 6,000 Iranians, depending on who you ask. But it was difficult for another reason. That's because it is essentially an admission that the United States has lost this war. Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian also signed the agreement on Wednesday night in Tehran, issuing this statement afterwards. This text is the reflection of the voice of a nation that did not trade its dignity and independence for any threat or pressure. What was recorded today was the result of national resilience, political rationality, and responsible diplomacy. The deal has also been hailed by Hezbollah in Lebanon, with the organization's chief, Naim Qassem, hailing it as, quote, a great victory. That sentiment was echoed by Iran's chief negotiator, Mohammad Halabaf, who said this: the agreement is a record of US failure. People will see it and judge. So what's in the deal? It is essentially the gateway to a permanent settlement, opening up a 60-day window for negotiations. But what does each side get in the meantime? Well, the US gets a return to pre-war global economic conditions, and, well, not much more than that, really. In Iran, it gets quite a lot, including hard cash. Here are the top lines. Number 1. Immediate and permanent termination of all hostilities, including in Lebanon, with the final deal including the termination of all future hostilities in Lebanon. 2. Neither Iran nor the United States will interfere in the internal affairs of the other. 3. The dismantling of all US naval blockade of Iranian ports begins immediately and is complete within 30 days. 4. The Iranian blockade of the Strait of Hormuz likewise ends immediately, with safe and toll-free passage for vessels guaranteed for 60 days. 5. The United States will agree a plan to provide at least $300 billion for Iran's reconstruction and economic development, with the payment mechanism finalized within 60 days as part of the final deal. 6. The United States undertakes to terminate all sanctions, whether bilateral or multilateral, against Iran, with a schedule agreed in the final deal. 7. But all US sanctions on Iranian oil sales will be immediately lifted until all other sanctions are lifted. 8. Iran reaffirms it will not develop nuclear weapons. Details around uranium enrichment and stockpiles will also be agreed, with any resolution of the issue tied to the sanctions schedule agreed. And 9. Any Iranian assets frozen by the United States will also be released upon the implementation of the memorandum, with a procedure agreed to during the negotiations. Incredible. On Wednesday night, Trump went into the reasons behind his agreements with the deal, beginning with this real pressures behind his step down.
If we didn't do this deal, we could have dropped more bombs for another 3 weeks, 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 2 years. You would never have the Hormuz Strait open. You would never have success. Your market would have, instead of going up at levels that nobody's ever seen before, would go down at levels that nobody ever saw before, maybe except for 1929 or whatever. And, all the tough guys don't realize that this wasn't a 3-month deal. This was years in the making. You know why? because I was the one that killed General Soleimani. And if I didn't kill General Soleimani, we probably wouldn't be talking right now about this deal, because he was a mad genius.
So what the US president is telling us that his massive miscalculation urged on him by Israel was about to plunge the globe into an economic freefall comparable to the Great Depression. But no, this deal had nothing to do with our saving. It's apparently been years in the making and involving several five-dimensional chess moves, including the killing of Iranian military leader Qasem Soleimani in 2020. It's extremely hard to see how the Washington Republican and Democratic hawks are going to see this as representing strategic superiority, given that the United States gets almost nothing out of the deal. Later in that press conference, though, Trump elaborated on the catch-22 he'd put himself in.
But no matter what I do, I'm going to get bad press. I know that. Now, if I did the opposite, if I went out and continued to bomb them for another 4, just bomb the hell out of them, I'd get bad press on that. No, there's nothing I can do. But what this does is it allows the ships to go. If we keep bombing, those ships won't be going. And you're talking about $500, $600, $700 million a day. It's a lot of money, a lot of money. That's why the world is okay. It's liquid, it's fine. Also, we run out of reserves in about 4 weeks. You know, there are reserves all over the world, and we would really run out. And there'll be a time when you wouldn't be able to get it. And you want to see Bedlam?
The best part of the speech, by the way, is Marco Rubio in the background. He literally looks like he wants the ground to swallow him whole. And I'm like, yeah, if I was a war hawk who had been sticking my nose out for this kind of belligerence they'd been engaging up until now, only to be capitulated immediately by the person they've put in charge, chef's kiss. So far, both sides appear to be sticking to those terms. And as you can see from this marine traffic graphic, tankers and cargo ships have now begun to move through the Strait of Hormuz in greater numbers than we've seen since Trump and Netanyahu started this war in February. 10 have apparently passed through today, including 3 Saudi-flagged vessels. If the deal holds and global traffic increases, the economic situation will improve, as will the United States' domestic economic situation, which has been hard hit by this war. And there's another perspective from which this could be a real moment of history and very good for the Middle East as a whole. That's because for the first time in recent memory, Israel may find itself seriously constrained. Here was Trump again.
Look, think of what Israel's getting. They're not going to be nuked. It's very simple. I told Bibi, your biggest risk was that they'd drop a nuclear weapon into the middle of Israel. They'd only need one, and there would be no more Israel. Think of it, baby. You got the best, the most important thing that you were asking for is that. So I think they're happy. Some people are going to be, not him, but there are some people, some writers, some that I thought were friends of mine, but I don't want them as friends anymore because they're either stupid or they're bad people. But we stopped nuclear holocaust, and it stopped too. I mean, there's not going to be any of that. And in all fairness to Bibi Netanyahu, who happens to be a good man, gets a little excited sometimes, but he happens to be a very good man. We've had an amazing partnership. He's been an amazing prime minister. We have a little dispute over Lebanon. I say, you can do a little softer touch, Bibi. You don't have to knock down a building every time somebody walks into it that's from Hezbollah.
I mean, it's funny for him to say, like, you got everything you wanted, which was Iran to not have nuclear weapons. They already didn't have nuclear weapons. There was the JCPOA, which he ripped up Trump. Again, at the presumably at the behest of Israel with which to do it. And then to go and say, like, oh, well, you need to stop doing things in Lebanon. That's what Netanyahu wants. He wants to expand the territory of Israel. It's the only thing that he engages in doing things. The reason that he's prime minister is to expand the territory of Israel. Like, well, you got the one thing that you wanted, which was the thing that we already had that I ripped up. Brilliant. Art of the deal. Art of the deal, everyone. There was one particularly funny moment in that press conference as well, when Donald Trump was confronted with a prescient historical comment.
A wise man once said in January of 2020, Iran never won a war, but never lost a negotiation. That wise man.
Who said that?
Donald Trump.
Oh, that's what I thought you were going to say.
So how do you go back to the United States and convince a skeptical American public that this deal is a
look,
win?
Here they lost militarily, okay? It's very tough because I know that no matter what, if I would go, by the way, if I'd go another 3 or 4 weeks, those same people that are critical would say, he went too long, he should have done, no matter what. If they raised the white flag of surrender, and if they said, praise be to Allah, Donald Trump is the greatest president ever. We totally concede, we totally give up. This war is over, we have failed. the New York Times and CNN and a couple of others, they're not all that dishonest, they'd say Iran had a great victory, okay? They practically do that. You know, it's amazing. When we knocked out their last ship, they had 159 ships. When we knocked out the last ship, the Times refused to do a story on it. They said, why wouldn't you? They don't have a Navy, and you don't want to do a story on it. They don't have an Air Force, you don't want to do a story. We need a fair press. And that's why they're all doing so badly, because they lost credibility.
Yeah, the fact that like the harbinger of the breaking down of the world order is so funny. I can't deal with it. I can't deal with it, Stephen. Serious notes, this is incredibly important news. It's not just memes about how silly Trump is, but there is some serious things to be talked about here, and I'm assuming you have plenty to say.
Anything involving Trump is both serious and memes. Like there's no getting away from it. And the one line there that I love more than ever is that, you know, we stop nuclear holocaust. That's like what this deal did, and it really indicates, you know, how important it is for Trump to come across as having won something here, where he's got to raise the stakes so high.
It's like an episode of 24, like the next season of 24. They have to have, if we had nukes now, we have to have like aliens or something.
Yeah, but this is what they call in TV jumping the shark, right? This is where it's like, oh, it was actually nuclear war all along, but we stopped it. Like literally nobody believes that. And that's why he's got to attack the press in that clip, because he's also got to discredit the press who are going to criticize him for this, as they massively have, including the right-wing press and Fox News, and everybody cannot believe what Trump has done.
Also worth pointing out, like, if there was going to be a nuclear holocaust in the Middle East, there's only one country in that region that owns nuclear weapons.
Could have done it, yeah.
And it's Israel.
Exactly. So, look, memes aside and joking aside, the deal is actually, it's very bad for the Washington Hawks. They'll hate it. It's very bad for Israel, and we're going to talk about that in a bit, so I won't talk about that now. But in lots of ways, it is actually really, really good. I mean, it's great. It's great for Iran, and it's potentially actually not bad for the US either. So, of course, it looks like a step down if you're a kind of if you adopt the point of view of US exceptionism and imperialism, it looks terrible. If you adopt the point of view, which I think is generally Trump's instinct, which is that actually trade is good. Why should China and Russia get Iranian oil when we could be buying it as well? Get a deal on that, get, you know, lower prices and so on and so forth. I think, you know, that is ultimately how Trump tends to think, where, you know, and I don't want to credit him with too much, but he's not actually wrong. You know, there is an old like Chicago school conservative economic thought, which is that trade is what brings peace. Like open trade, the open exchange of money for goods in the globe. Brings peace, because people have so much invested in
economic
peace.
interreliance. Yeah, it's the kind of the grand victory of Kissingerism, really, in that specific realm. Obviously, the genocides are notwithstanding, but you know what I mean. Like, economic interreliance is the basis with those kind of mutually assured economic destruction that we did. It was plain for the world to see. And I was saying in the run-up to what we've seen now, like, it's imperative that the US is forced to back down by Iran here for the importance of the UN Charter, but also for the interests of global kind of peace and prosperity.
And, you know, whatever you say about the Abraham Accords and the way that, you know, it might have been, there's obviously a clear attempt there. I don't know whether by Trump, but certainly, you know, Israel's fondness for them as a way of collapsing Palestinian resistance to Israel within Palestine. For Trump, it's also like a trade. They're also trade deals. They're also about, you know, that's the thing. The thing he loves: trade deals, economic development. Always for capitalists, not necessarily for the people. These are the things he instinctually is interested in, and I think that really puts him at odds with the hawkish people in his cabinet and the larger kind of hawkish, which is, you know, the Washington establishment, which crosses across Republican and Democratic lines. So
there's always a good dialogue between the Democrats and the Republicans on this stuff, isn't there?
They seem to have a common natural understanding of America's role in the world, which is, you know, to clobber countries into submission. And Trump, I think, you know, obviously has had a go at that, but I don't think that is his natural perspective on things. So look, what does the deal do? I mean, there's different perspectives on how successful it is. Like immediately for the world economically, it staves off, and I don't think Trump was exaggerating there, potential very severe economic chilling and a real crisis in energy. Unfortunately, it may also halt the way in which countries, in order to, on the basis of what happened, Russia's invasion of Ukraine and then Trump and Israel's war on Iran, those were two great big energy shocks. And as a result, many countries are moving either to like dirtier fuel in some cases, but in many cases to cleaner fuel and building their own sort of domestic energy security. If that were to continue, that would be an overall good for the world. But of course, it's an overall good that would come at the expense of a lot of people, a lot of agricultural problems, a lot of issues in the food chain, a lot of issues in transport. I don't think Trump was exaggerating when he talked about bedlam. If things dried up to that extent, if the oil restores ran out, it's also like, it is actually an amazing deal for the Middle East as a whole. It's not a good deal for Israel, which makes it a good deal for the Middle East as a whole.
We might get Arab-Iranian normalization. That'd be crazy.
You could get all kinds of normalization. You could get all kinds of ways in which it'll take a while. Iran is not a trusted country for all kinds of reasons in the region, but part of that comes from a sort of global approach to Iran, which has been there for decades, which is to sort of starve it into submission and starve its people into overthrowing its regime. That's just never happened. And in fact, one of the war aims of this war was to do regime change in Iran. Now, actually, they did succeed in doing regime change, and what they replaced the old regime was a much sort of younger, sharper, more sort of determined, sort of unafraid, nothing to lose kind of government in Iran, and they've proved incredibly effective as negotiators, and as really understanding where their red lines are, and also understanding that Trump's red lines were going to like slowly evaporate as the global economic hit came into effect. So it's there are all kinds of possibilities. Once that money starts flowing back into Iran, there's also like lots of possibilities for the Iranian people that will change. One of the effects of sanctions is to create a state which is always on the verge of failure. And so to create a massively domestically securitized state, which has to look out for enemies everywhere, has to stop the press, stop freedom in various sorts of ways in order to maintain itself on the verge of, constantly on the verge of extinction. It's the way in which sanctions never actually really work. They just create like horrific conditions, both economic conditions, but then also state security conditions internally in countries. $300 billion in reconstruction, being able freely to sell their oil without sanction, the release of frozen Iranian assets. If that all flows into Iran, to the people, you will over time see a loosening of its own society, which will be really good for Iranians as well. It's really about the question of whether or not you can like normalize, not necessarily every relation with Iran, but normalize somehow the relationship between Iran and other states, because Iran is no longer in this like desperate position. So if that comes about, that would be a good deal. Although of course it would be a really, really bad deal for Israel, because, well, we'll talk about that in a minute.
Indeed so. I mean, I was worried as soon as the conflict kicked off, especially once Ali Khamenei had been killed, that it would mean a total victory for the hardliners in Iran. But Masoud Pezeshkian being able to hold up the deal that he's signed and bring, the powerful unipole of America to heel in these terms, and of course, the lifting of sanctions, all the unfreezing of assets, the money that's going to come in investment into the country that could lead to a more normalization and prosperity, maybe there might actually be a route towards the reformists in Iran after all, which was something I was scared that reformism would just totally capitulate because of what happened here and it would be total victory for the hardliners, which looks like, fingers crossed, maybe we might be able to at least somewhat see a future, which would mean more normalization. The biggest loser in the US-Iran peace deal signed on Wednesday night is Israel, it turns out. It's the sorest loser as well. According to the New York Times, Israel was left stunned by the deal, seeing it as a catastrophic capitulation that leaves the country in a worse position in respect of its war aims. Israeli politicians and media figures certainly seem to see it that way, and smelling blood, they're going for Prime Minister Netanyahu. In a speech to open a road, Netanyahu made his first real comments on the deal, saying this: "Today we decided that Road 60 will be named as it befits it, Derech HaTanakh, the road our forefathers walked on which the story of our people was written, and on which we declare in a clear voice the people of Israel has returned home and will remain here forever." But many in Israeli political society aren't buying it. This was Jonathan Reinhold and Bar Ilan University speaking to Reuters.
In effect, Israel will be bound by the fact that the United States will pressure it not to do anything against this agreement. That doesn't mean every single element of the agreement, but it means that Israel will, in a broad sense, have to live with it. This agreement represents a failure of Netanyahu's security policy. He bet the house on relations with Donald Trump. As part of that, it led to the collapse of relations with the Democrats in the United States. Israel now has a hostile Democratic Party, a hostile president, and a significant portion of the Republican Party who are no longer as supportive as they were. His strategy for the last 15 years has been built on militarily resolving the Iranian threat to Israel. His last hope is that the Iranians do not accept the agreement, the final agreement, and that therefore the sanctions will remain in place and that Iran will be constrained militarily and financially. This agreement, particularly if it's implemented, the terms of the memorandum are implemented in a final agreement that's going to be negotiated. If that happens, this would be an extremely bad shift in the balance of power against Israel in the region.
What I will say is I think the Democrats probably turned off more because of the whole genocide thing rather than getting into bed with Donald Trump, but that's by the by. Now, this was from Ben Dror Yemeni, a columnist at Yedioth Aharonoth, Israel's largest newspaper. A disaster foreknown. We thought we'd hit rock bottom. We were wrong. Trump reneged on every promise, turned Iran into a power, strengthened Hezbollah, and as a final flourish gave Israel a kick and humiliation. Time and again, Netanyahu was told that his strategy was a disaster foreknown. He charged headlong into the wall and led Israel into the most severe collapse in its history. But it's not just Israelis losing it. Zionists around the world are furious too. This was YouTuber Ben Shapiro.
Noticing that Mohammed Khalibaf, who will apparently on Friday be literally in a photo op with the Vice President of the United States. I cannot express to you how stomach-turning that is. I don't care who the Vice President is. I don't care who the President is. Leaders of the United States of America in a photo op with a mass murdering terrorist supporter like Mohammed Khalibaf shaking hands 6 months after he blew away 42,000 innocent people in the streets and weeks after his administration was firing missiles at literally all of our allies in the region and continues to support every terrorist group in the region and is currently continuing to control the strait. Like right now, it is not fully open for business unless the Iranians have, quote unquote, decided it is.
Oh, is killing tens of thousands of people bad now, Ben? Oh, I should have known. The UK's own Jake Wallace-Simons, former editor of the Jewish Chronicle, had this to say.
It's true that the Iranians have suffered the mother of all batterings over the last few weeks of the war. Their military capabilities have been severely degraded. Their stockpile of ballistic missiles has been degraded by about 85%. And Hezbollah, one of their proxies, of course, has been battered as well. But they remain in control. And the real issue is that they've proven to the world that they can absorb those American punches. They can defy the world's foremost military superpower and come out with the regime still in charge, having exerted its dominance over the Strait of Hormuz, forcing the Americans into a position where they've got to withdraw, and ultimately have secured hundreds of billions of sanctions relief if this all goes through, which will enable them not just to build back, but then they will have no restraint on the amount of rebuilding they do in terms of reinstating their proxies, their nuclear program potentially, and other methods of belligerence. And so even the restraints that were implemented on Iran before the war, such as sanctions, will be now lifted. And so in my view, the Americans have suffered a great humiliation and a great defeat, and they've only empowered Iran.
And then there was this, it was on breaking points.
Yeah, and of course, who tried to assassinate him?
Yeah.
Tried to assassinate John Bolton? Tried to.
What's going on?
So I'm telling you what's going on.
Shouldn't laugh. One of the best online responses was this, though, from Israeli journalist and politician Yinon Magal. Biden, save us! Oh, no. Oh, did you just kind of get rid of, or hope, try and at least agitate to get rid of somebody who was like totally for you, just allowing you to do the genocide totally without any kind of restraint or any kind of meaningful restraint, just continual like arms funding and continual settlement towards Israel coming from Biden. Oh, we'll stop you going into Rafah. Oh, you're going to Rafah. Oh, who cares? And replace him with the rat fucker in chief, Donald Trump, who only looks after himself. Oh no. Oh, who could have thought it would end up like this? Stephen, did you think it would end up like this?
I don't know if I thought it would end up like this. I can tell you though that it's not over yet by any means. The points that Jake Wallace-Simons brings up there about what Iran is sort of untethered to do by the deal, although he doesn't really know. Like, we don't actually have the final deal yet. This is a memorandum of understanding that sets a way in which you can negotiate over the next 60 days for a final deal, and there are going to be all sorts of mechanisms that Iran will have to meet. But it's not over yet. It's like intolerable for Israel. So for example, at the moment in the memorandum of understanding, there's no mention of ballistic missiles. So the nuclear part of things is very much central, but nothing constrains Iran from acting like any other country in the world and building its own defensive arsenal of ballistic missiles, for example.
So. Yeah, he was literally caught on TV saying, every other country has ballistic missiles, they can have some as a treat.
He also said lots of other countries enrich uranium for energy, so why shouldn't Iran? Like, and these are, very reasonable things to say about a country, but, obviously there is a history where there'll want to be some checks in place to make sure that that they're not doing, nuclear weapons. Although I have to say, like, one of the most interesting phrases in that memorandum of understanding is that it says Iran reaffirms that it won't build nuclear weapons. In other words, they're saying, we've been saying this all along that we're not going to build nuclear weapons, but we'll say it again for you in order to get this 300 billion or whatever. But look, the deal, in a sense, it's at its most dangerous phase now, because there is like a horizon there which looks towards a changed Middle East, and that is something that really Israel can't tolerate. So I expect to see all kinds of things happen over the next 60 days, which will be an attempt to disrupt this deal by a country, Israel, whose whole notion of security means it is like ever expansionist in its reach. It means interfering with other governments, interfering with other groups, blowing up villages in other countries, having security zones.
Interfering with other people's elections?
Interfering with other people's election, or I'm not sure what you're referring to there.
There was a story, though, where there was an Israeli company that was that the French government had found had interfered in the Scottish elections.
Didn't see that.
Or had been bot posting and troll farming.
So anyway, lots of it ever spreads, this idea of security, and it will absolutely spread to Iran and to this deal as well. I really don't expect this to go through very easily, and if it does go through, it'll be because both Iran and I think increasingly Donald Trump understands that Israel is not a fair player in this arena,
and it's not a vote winner. It's not a vote winner either.
And it's not a vote winner as well. It puts Netanyahu in such a difficult position with elections coming up, if they indeed even happen.
I also want to point out that there's no soft liners in Israel.
No.
That's all hardliners. Yair Lapid and Naftali Bennett, the two kind of heir apparents at this point, both just as belligerent in this kind of manner as Netanyahu is. And the youth in Israel are incredibly right wing. So there's loads of political instability that will come out of anything that looks even remotely close to something similar to what we're seeing with this memorandum of understanding, if that's what the end of negotiation looks like. And you mentioned the Abraham Accords earlier. If we see more Arab-Iranian normalization out of what we're seeing here from what we know so far, then it collapses the Abraham Accords. This is Trump's big thing. It was his big achievement was doing the Abraham Accords. And now, what reason do the Arab countries have to continue that on, given that Trump's kind of subservience to Netanyahu was what saw them attacked by Iran?
I mean, it was his big vision. I don't think it was his big triumph, because not that many countries signed up to it. And then obviously, the question of Saudi Arabia signing up, which was very much in the air before October the 7th as well.
True.
But
Very,
it
very
hasn't
true.
happened and probably won't now.
Well, hopefully, the more these negotiations go on, the more we'll see endless levels of cope from the pro-Israel crowd. Fingers crossed, inshallah, we shall see that. As always, thank you again, Stephen, for joining me tonight.
Thanks very much, Elena.
Dream team back together, just as we like it. And as always, everyone, thank you very much for tuning in at home as well. Get your kettle on, as I said before, for our live all-night election coverage. That is starting at 9:45 p.m. Do not leave your seats. For now, you've been watching Novara Media. We'll see you all shortly.